Hello, this video is all over the place, so I just kind of want to do a little index at the beginning here, a little intro. We're going to start with the fun stuff, the importance of your camera's bit depth and color space. Good stuff to know. Then I'm going to do a breakdown of my workflow, projecting footage back into the scene using Nathan Vegdahl's new camera project node that he made for us. And then working with that footage, trying to match the CG lights to the real lights and the real footage, and a little bit of final grading in the viewport, because while I usually try to make the CG match the footage, sometimes it's nice to have the footage kind of push a little bit to match the CG too in kind of a flexible way. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the options for working with a digital camera and depth of field and distortion and all of that. And at the end, we're doing a really quick basic kind of introduction to keying in Fusion and Resolve for making kind of pre-keyed EXR plates. So here we go. Okay, hello. So let's talk green screen stuff, because I've been working on this this taxi scene here, and it's going really. Actually, okay, let's start back at the beginning. 3 years ago, I filmed this scene with Tom, and it's fun. It's got this kind of, homegrown feeling to it, but it also looks like exactly what it is, which is we set up a video projector outside of a minivan and strung some lights up on. Actually, they already had this in their minivan, but it was fine, but it felt a little bit, not as immersive as I wanted. So last year, we filmed it again on a green screen so I could kind of wrap it, in a specific kind of sci-fi taxi, because I thought that'd be fun, and I wanted to be able to get the, the reflections through the windows, and I just thought the integration would be a little bit better. But then I started animating the exterior shots and the taxi I had driving like crazy, and then it kept cutting to him kind of sitting here on this box, kind of just, looking a little bit too chill. So I was like, Tom, can we film this scene for a third time? And I'd modeled this kind of leather bench seat for the inside of the taxi, and I was like, Lux, is there a chance that you could build this but in real life? And Lux did build it in real life. Look at this. How cool is this thing? So we filmed it again with a lot of interaction of Tom throwing himself all over the bench seat, and his wife Amy is swinging an LED bar overhead. And we got both lockdown camera stuff and stuff where I'm just waving the camera all over on the tripod. And I was honestly thinking this was going to be a giant pain in the butt. Like, I thought this scene was going to take me months and months, but it turns out everything's coming together so that, like, I can get an initial version of a shot in like 40 minutes. And like, that's animated and kind of matching up the lights and everything too. So I want to share some of the stuff I've been doing. There's a couple tricks in there I've never talked about before. And honestly, I'm just really excited because, like, look at this. It feels nice and dynamic and fast-paced, and I can cut from the interior stuff to the exterior stuff, and all just feels nice and kinetic, and it's a really good time. In fact, that was a shot where the camera's moving around. This shot, the camera, I think, is locked down, and it still feels just as engaging, but it's a lot easier because you don't have to bother with motion tracking or anything. So, let's get into it. I think, a lot of you have asked how I'm doing the keying in Resolve, and I always drag my heels, mostly because, one, I'm doing it wrong, and two, I'm just using a bunch of tutorials I found, and I don't want to remake other people's tutorials, but I can walk through my kind of hackish way and direct you to the tutorials that I've been using. But I'll do that at the end. Let's jump straight into the, assuming you've already keyed your footage stage right now, because that's the fun bit. And I basically always put my pre-keyed footage in the shot now. Like, it looks weird from any other angle, but from the camera view, it always lines up perfectly. And it gives you just a lot of advantages. You get shadows. His head is casting a shadow on different things, and you get reflections in the windows of him actually moving around. You get a lot. I can add additional camera movement on top of the original thing, add camera shake. I can put volumetric haze in there that the lighting and everything is affecting with. It just gives you so much more integration. And it can, like, play nice with the depth of field if you want to. You can kind of, it's just a lot more control. And it's a little bit of a dirty way of doing it. So there's kind of the two different ways. Typically what you do is you would render out this background, bring it into your compositor, and then lay the footage behind it in the composite, and that would be the final shot. And I'm kind of doing it backwards, where I'm keying ahead of time, bringing that into the shot, and then when this is rendered out of Blender, I just drop that, that rendered sequence straight into the timeline. The shot is done. It does mean that in the final shot, it's harder to tweak things, but that just means I tweak everything here in the viewport. And I like that because it means, like, getting the interaction between the lighting and all of that, like just dialing it all in. I can just do that right here. And it does help to have a good GPU for that, that interactivity and that responsiveness. But yeah, okay, how do I talk? I think I'm just going to delete everything from the shot and kind of kind of start over to show you guys. First, let's start with some stuff that isn't as much fun, but it is. If you're going to be doing a lot of green screen, it's really important to know. And we'll get through it fast. Don't tune out. Okay, so this shape here, this represents, I think, basically every color that humans are supposed to be able to see. And any image format on your computer, like a JPEG or, you know, whatever, has a color space. And the color space just means how much of these colors can that image format represent. So the average JPEG uses a Rec 709 sRGB color space, and so of this shape here, it can represent all these ones in the middle. And honestly, for a lot of things, that's totally fine. If you look at a picture, you're not going to notice that things outside of that are missing. But it does mean if you're going to be doing a lot of image manipulation and stuff, you are cropping out a lot of possible colors. The ACEs, if you've ever heard of the ACEs color space, it is much bigger, encompassing everything. So that's color space. And if you're shooting on a DSLR or some sort of nice camera, a lot of times you can actually pick the color space that you want to be shooting in. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the bit depth, and either unfortunately or fortunately, bit depth seems to be the biggest thing controlling whether I get a good key or not. And most cameras, I think, are typically going to be shooting in 8, 10, or 12-bit color. 8-bit is like, that's stripping out as much as possible without the image falling apart, and you can think of it as the resolution of the color. So here we have every representable color. Let's say this grid represents 8-bit color. You can see there aren't all that many options between, you know, blue and orange, which means if you try to key that, you're gonna get all of these chunky artifacts and stuff that, like, to your eye maybe kind of blend together, but once you start trying to do math and keying and all of that on it, it falls apart a little bit and you get those jagged edges. If I subdivide this here, now we've got, you know, 10-bit color, and there's a lot more different options there. It's a lot easier to key 10-bit color, but it's still a little bit tricky. And then if we get all the way up to 12-bit color, it doesn't matter what you do. You have got so many shades of green. I can film so fast and dirty with 12-bit color, and you just have enough color data to ring things out and still get a good, decent key. And just in the interest of accuracy, and so that technical people don't get mad at me, I subdivided it once, which implies that this can represent 4 times as many colors as this. It's actually 64 times more color, the difference between 10-bit and 8-bit. So it's subdivide, 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 so each square now is 64 times more dense. And the difference between 10-bit and 12-bit is 4 times again. So it's very dense, and let's see if we can crash Blender here. Yeah, it's frozen. Oh, we're back. Okay, so yeah, a lot more data in 12-bit, and also probably doesn't need to be said, 12-bit files are significantly larger, but if you've got the space, again, they're cool. And this can both be like a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing because if you have an 8-bit camera, it's just you're gonna have a much harder time getting a good key, even if you do everything right. It's a good thing because it means if you can get your hands on a 10-bit or 12-bit camera, you will just have a much easier time without actually changing any of your workflow. Like, I don't have a 12-bit camera, but my friend Andy Daprowski does, and he lends it to me every time I'm going to be shooting a green screen scene. It just makes my life so much easier. So if you know anybody with one, or if you can borrow one just for shooting green screen scenes, it can save your butt. And yeah, I don't know, that's not a thing people talk about in tutorials much, but your gear really does have quite a bit to do with the success of the key. And you can still get good results if you're shooting, in any of these formats. It is a big factor. The last thing I want to talk about is something Nathan and I were experimenting with. So remember, the color space is how many of these colors your format is able to represent. And you'd think you'd always want the largest color space, but imagine you're shooting on an 8-bit format here, a very kind of low-res, color-wise format, and you're trying to cover all of this space here. This is very low-res. It's only like 4 squares across the entire thing. If you pick a smaller color space like sRGB, shrink all of that down, suddenly, comparatively, right here where you need it, you have more resolution. Which means if you're shooting on an 8-bit camera, filming on a smaller color space actually gives you more resolution in the place where you need it. And you can always just look up. You can look up what bit depth your camera is. That's information that's out there. Okay, that out of the way, what is the most useful thing I found for actually shooting green screen? The most useful thing I found is have Have interactive lighting. Have some sort of, like right here, it's just soft and ambient and nothing's really grounding him into the scene. It's all just kind of cloudy. Whereas once he walks this way, I had this actual light shining down onto him, and now he 100% feels like he's there in the scene. And maybe you're thinking, Ian, that doesn't look so bad. That's fine. I spent a day just trying to massage this. I'm doing all of this stuff with gradients and kind of pushing the color around, which is something I'll show you in a bit later in the video. I had to work so hard to make it feel as if he's actually here in this space. And I found that that's literally the difference when I'm trying to composite the shot. Does it feel believable or does it not? It's, do I have the lighting directly affecting them, which means if you just set up big soft lighting to light the green screen and have the actor walking around with no particularly motivated lights, it really does make the job a lot harder. Like this scene right here, very tricky. I had to do a lot to kind of make this one work because again, there isn't really any identifiable light source. Whereas this one here, I've got this kind of red glow hitting him, I've got the blue light coming from up above, and I have the lights passing by, all of which work together to really make him feel situated in the scene. So I've got these little RGB panel lights, and I'll usually set one up on a tripod somewhere on the stage just to give me something to work with once I get into the digital environment. It means I have lots of different scenes now where maybe the lighting is even too high contrast, but it feels very intentional and kind of situated. A couple more examples of this. In this shot, no joke, I forgot to light him. We were setting up other things and I was like, oh Josh, grab the coffee and walk up there. He's just walking underneath the soft boxes we were using for the green screen. There was no real thought at all put into the lighting. I was just thinking about focus and kind of all of that. As opposed to the reverse, where I actually did put some thought into it. And you can see we have this orange light here interacting with that. We have more direct light coming down and hitting him. And this shot just works so much better. Same with this shot here where the lighting's moving overhead. This is just a single bar light kind of being swung over him and everything else is helping justify it, but works together really well. And this shot here too, we've got this lamp here lighting him up and it's really hard to tell where the practical stuff ends and the CG begins. Also, just to touch back on the bit depth, everything else in this episode was filmed 12-bit except for this scene, which was 10-bit. And you can see that this shot not only was by far the hardest to key. In fact, I had to ask my friend Zeke Faust to help me key this just because he's a lot better. You can also see it's the worst kind of key in the whole thing regardless, just because it's all just, you had to smooth out all of the harsh, edges and stuff. Anyways. Oh, I decided that I was going to finish the video today when I was more awake, but then I lay awake for like 4 hours last night for some reason, and, we'll see how it goes. So, at its most basic, this is kind of what I'm talking about. You import, the pre-keyed footage here, and you can use Control R to add some edge loops, cut out anything you don't want if you want to keep it nice and clean. And this can work really easily, especially if you're shooting kind of like orthogonal, like you have the green screen, you have the person walking around on the green screen, and you're just kind of filming them. So it's all straight on, they stay the same distance. And for some things, that works really good. I try to advise against that because it's not really cinematography. Like, you're not really getting shots, you're more getting an element of a person standing on a green screen stage. And I've said this before, even good DPs, they get on a green screen and they stop thinking in terms of shots and they start thinking in terms of like, well, we'll just film you walking around and doing the thing. It's like you still want to be filming it as if the real location were there. You still want to be picking kind of interesting angles. Sometimes I like to shoot it in a weird way just to force myself to have to come up with something creative during the composite. But yeah, if you just want someone to walk around in an environment, this can work really well. They're always staying the same distance. They're just walking around in the footage. But let's talk about if you want to be a little bit more complex. I like, and I'll show you how to do all of this in a minute here. I just want to show you kind of what I'm doing first. I like setting up the footage so it's actually existing in the same place as the character would be. So in this case, if Tom is sitting on the bench, I set up the footage so it's basically sitting on the bench too. And then from the camera's point of view, I project that back onto the surface here. So it looks kind of weird from here, but from the camera's point of view, it is a perfectly undistorted version of the footage. And I like to do this for a few reasons. The first one is, here, let's say depth of field. If I have a really shallow depth of field going on, I can focus it on his head, and it's about the same, focal depth along with the rest of the taxi, and the depth of field just kind of works. And his knees are out of focus. We can also, turn the focus down and focus on his knees, and yeah, it just is incorporated a lot better that way. Also, the reflections since he's more or less where he's supposed to be in the taxi, all of these reflections are slightly more accurate that you just get for free. And it's not particularly useful in this case, but I had this kind of problem board here. It's just a support board that I wrapped in green tape, and it doesn't key particularly great. I didn't want to roto it. Because this is actually here in the scene, in a few shots, I just slide the projector camera over so that, here, let's get a better view, so that the geometry of the environment is actually kind of doing the masking for me. Again, it doesn't work great in this scene. But the big reason I love to do it is I can add my own new camera, and this is what I render. So one camera just projects the footage onto there. Using a method, again, I'll talk about it in a second because it's new and kind of fun. And then I'll render out this camera, and this one can be looking at Tom. It can be, panning to look at the little robot taxi AI thing. And more importantly, I can add some of the camera shake. Do you guys remember Camera Shakeify? It's the add-on Nathan and I made a while ago where we 3D tracked different camera motions, like literally just filming out of a car window or like riding a bike or walking. And so I can add in the actual motion of filming in a car on top of this digital camera with a little bit of bike on gravel just to give it that little bit of a grit, But you can see it's actually moving a little bit in 3D space, and our brains are really, really sensitive to those little shifts and that parallax. Which means it's subtle, but if the camera's shaking around like this a little bit, it all is just going to work just a little bit better. There's a few things I really like about this setup, the locked off camera setup. The first one is every time I cut back to this angle, all I have to do is replace the footage file on this, and everything just lines up. I can change the environment moving by and all of that, but like the camera setup and the lighting in the environment and any masking and stuff I do, it's just the new shot is basically ready to go. I just get to jump into the fun bit of maybe adding some new signs going by in the background. And you can get a lot of variety in there too. I love that I can change the camera angle. I can go, super fisheye and stuff if I want to, look around, and it doesn't feel like I'm just cutting the same shot over and over. If I were really smart, you can see right now his bag is, oh wait, we're in fisheye, so it's hard to know where I'm actually selecting here. Let's go into perspective here. You can see I've got his bag blocking his legs, was just kind of a fortunate coincidence. If I were really thinking, I would have recorded everything sideways in portrait mode, so we get the full body, him sitting there in the car. Then I could look, literally everywhere, and it would just work. But yeah, considering the slow, hard, unfun part tends to be that initial setup where you're like, all right, where does the camera go? How do we make the lights work and everything? If you can just figure that out once and just drag and drop for the entire rest of the scene, that is a really good way to save a bunch of time. Okay, let's, before we do 3D, no, I'll show you 3D. Yeah, for 3D shots, I'm not going to make an entire motion tracking tutorial right now because I've already made a bunch of them, and they're all exactly the same, so you can just search for it in the Patreon, or I'll link below or something. But at the end, you get these tracking points here, and once you apply the camera solver constraint to the camera, if you go under overlays, you'll see this motion tracking checkbox, and when you do that, you can actually see where all those different tracked points are in 3D space. So in this case, all I had to do was select the empty that corresponded to like a certain place on the set, line it up with that spot, and once I have that lined up, I hit Shift-S cursor to selected and make the origin point 3D cursor so I can rotate around that locked point and just line up some other point the same way. And turn down the opacity, and you can scale, and you can rotate and do all that stuff. Nathan actually made me a tool which is part of the Compify suite, which I think I'm going to be releasing as part of this video, which does help with that. And I'm not going to get into it right now, although I guess I could, but it allows you to designate 3 different points, and it'll line up the camera with those points, which helps you line up a lot of different things. Like I've been using it to line up tracked shots with like photo scans I get of the same location, so it's projecting straight onto the right geometry. The actual reason Nathan made it for me was because I was going to be doing a lot of complicated digital extensions, and I wanted to have one digital environment that I could always line up the virtual camera with. And so by having 3 points designated in the set, like as tracking markers, I could line every camera up so it would be matched up to the digital environment nicely. Anyways, I'm trying to go fast without really getting too far into it. But yeah, lining this up with the bench, and you basically get everything we were talking about with the 2D track. It's just in 3D now. So let's actually set this up, because I have been brushing over a couple steps. Like, how do we actually project the footage from the camera onto the surface? We've got a new way to do that. And okay, to get your footage onto this surface, in the past I would have recommended using the UV Project Modifier. And what the UV Project Modifier does is it creates a custom UV map on every frame just to based off of your camera's view, and so your footage will just perfectly fill this on the footage. And I think I'm still going to show you how to set that up. Like, it still works just as well, but we do have a better way. But yeah, select your object, go UV Project, which brings this up here. Select the UV map you want to be creating. Select the camera you want to be using as a projector, which in this case is camera 001. Let's give this surface now a material that actually uses this UV map. Oh, I almost forgot. You also want to put in the aspect ratio, 1920 by 1080. For the video surface, I want the video footage itself to be emissive, and I want everything else to be transparent. Yes, and we will mix those together here. And going to hit Control T to load some footage into the emissive shader here. You can also look up all these nodes if you just hit Shift A and type, you can always type in any node in there. Loading our footage, hit A to select everything, open image. And right now it doesn't work right, it's 50% transparent, but let's drag our alpha in to be the mix between the transparent and the emissive. Suddenly it's looking a lot better. We can change the emissive strength if we want to brighten him up a little bit here. Gonna check auto refresh just to keep it updating on every frame, and then we try to line up our camera so it kind of matches the actual shot. Now you notice one thing though, as we move him around, there's all of these weird warbles. And here let's create a brick texture really fast using these same coordinates here, so we can see kind of what's going on. Yeah, from the camera's point of view, this should all be straight, but there's all of this crazy distortion here. And you go in here and add some more geometry, which kind of cleans things up, but it's still not perfect. In some cases, get really, really bad, and you just have this massive, dense object trying to get all of these little distortions out. So instead of using the UV Project Modifier, I use Nathan's way. Here, let's get rid of all of this stuff here. Gonna delete the UV Project Modifier. Oh, the G-forces are crushing him. I'm gonna select the camera that I want to be a projector. Under the camera settings, go down to the bottom. I have mine showing up twice because I also have an experimental version. But yeah, if you click New Camera Project Node Group, go back into the footage material here, and if you hit Shift A and under Group, you'll see it actually created a new group here that we can use. It's a Camera Project node, and this generates a perfect UV Project, basically, modifier, but without any of the distortion, and it updates immediately. You just have to put in your aspect ratio, 1920 divided by 1080, and if we drag this down into the vector of our footage and go into the camera view, you can see no matter what we do, it is always just absolutely perfect. And so this is really cool. Thank you so much, Nathan, for that. I should have released this thing forever ago, because it's so handy, at least for my workflow. Oh, here we can also change this from repeats to clips, so we don't see down there. Although we can also bring it to be like that. But yeah, it also lets you move stuff around if you want to kind of cheat stuff and do all of that. So anyways, now we have our footage in the right place, more or less. I could have eyeballed this probably a little bit better, but in this case, because it's just locked off, we've got some leeway. I could add another camera here. Well, maybe I'll do that later. First, let's figure out lighting, because if I scrub through this a little bit, you can see there's lights passing over him, and that was just his wife Amy swinging an LED bar kind of back and forth over him. And I was thinking, oh, this is going to be so hard to try to match up all the different lights going over him, and this is going to take me weeks. It turns out it actually wasn't that tricky, and I'll show you how I did it. First, I'm going to get rid of the HDRI. This is actually my first time making a custom HDRI of a different environment to light a different one. It's kind of fun, but in this case, I'm just going to make it an RGB, kind of the dim yellow lights of a city. And look at this. This is so cool. We can see the reflections in all of these windows here of him. Like, this is, it's kind of weird because it's a reflection of the front of him behind him, but you can't really tell. Like, the motion all feels right. Typically, the lighting kind of feels right. But yeah, so the way to get all of these lights to match is first, I'm going to have the car stay still. In most of these shots I did, the car is actually stationary and the entire environment is moving around him, just because I didn't want to have to chase the car around all the time when I was working. So I'm going to create an empty here that's going to be the parent of everything that's moving by. I'm going to put it here, hit I to add a location keyframe. I'm going to go to a little bit later, move it back this way. I add another location keyframe. Can hover over these keyframes in the timeline and hit Shift E, linear extrapolation. And if we go over into the graph editor, we can see that we've now made it so these two keyframes here go off for forever. And so is that a pretty decent speed? I might actually speed it up just a little bit. Yeah, that seems nice. So to get this to work, all we have to do is create a light, select this, Control P, parent the light to the empty, and time it so that when a light hits him in the footage here, the point light is also going by with a fairly similar intensity. And I thought you were going to have to be so specific, but it turns out that the human brain is actually not all that good at knowing if lights are, as long as the brightness is somewhat correlated and it has a sense of movement, it all works really good. Have you ever had that thing where you've seen like a beam of light on the ground and you've no idea where it's coming from? It's like, how is that sunlight getting there? It's the same thing. As long as everything's kind of feeling right, it's great. In this case, I kind of made the light really bright. In fact, let's make it an area light here just to control it a little bit more and turn down the spread just to localize it. And here, let's warm it up a little bit so it matches the actual light on him. Actually, we can eyedropper this, and this isn't the best way to do this, but I might do that and just turn the saturation down and the value up, so it's all just a little bit warm. But yeah, I made the light bright enough so as it passed by, it maybe isn't even necessarily this light hitting him directly. It might just be light bouncing around in the taxi. Again, as long as everything's getting bright and dark in the same kind of way, it all works really good. So I would scrub through, and this is where having, you know, a somewhat decent GPU really does make a big help. But yeah, every time it get bright on him, I would try to line this light up here to a perfect position. Keep scrubbing, go to the next one here, and I would just duplicate this light, bring it back here, do it again. Sometimes you have to tweak the brightness, because Amy wasn't always angling it the exact right way. And sometimes she's moving it faster, and other times she's moving it slower. But because of parallax, if she's moving it really fast, I would just move the light right next to the taxi, so it would go by really fast. And if she's moving it slower, I would move it further away, so comparatively, it seems like it takes longer to go by. So you can use parallax to kind of help yourself out there. But yeah, kind of just eyeballed it. Like in this case, the light's hitting him before it's hitting the environment. So right at the first frame where it starts to hit him, I want to make sure it's already been hitting the environment a little bit here. And there we go. Yeah, that feels quite a bit better. Another thing I did, you can see the shadows here kind of give away that Tom isn't actually sitting there. I added this Tom scan here in basically the same place he'd be sitting, and wow, look into his wonderful quad-pupiled eyes. And then under object settings, I unchecked camera visibility and I guess glossy, so he doesn't show up in the reflection. I only want the footage to show up, but that way as the lights go by, you can kind of get a better sense that Tom is actually sitting there. This next one is a little bit of a dimmer one, and so here, I'll just stick this here. Maybe just move it slightly further away. Although again, as I said, because it's further away, it takes longer to go by, and so I might just want to keep it close by and keep the brightness down a little bit. And when I'm not stopping to explain what I'm doing, this process goes really fast. It just took a couple minutes to kind of set up the entire thing. One thing you might notice is as the lights go by, you can actually see them through the window. Like, you can't regularly, but once you're seeing them through glass, they show up as the shape that they actually are. And I didn't really like that because I wanted there to be like street lights, not just like big white rectangles. And under the object visibility, you can uncheck transmission, but that means that light just won't affect with any transmission at all. And I liked how these little ripped bits of the stickers were a little bit backlit, so I wanted to keep that. So what I ended up doing was just modeling a kind of street light around these lights here, parenting it to the light, and under the object properties, unchecking shadow so that this light can still cast light out of it. And that way, at the very least, it's street lights going by instead of just these ambiguous white rectangles. But yeah, so once I had all of these lights timed up in the right place, I basically just built the environment around the lights to justify, you know, if, say, Amy had, like, swung the light really slow. Maybe I would have put in like a big video billboard that he drives by or something. It's fun to kind of think like, all right, how do we make that's actually my favorite thing about shooting green screen is you're in this void where random things happen. Then when you get into the computer, it's like, all right, let's figure out a way to justify all of these random things. And usually it's the unexpected thing or the thing that goes wrong or the thing that accidentally ends up on set that like you have to kind of justify in a creative way that kind of makes the scene. At least that's my favorite bit. And yeah, then you just have to build a city outside the window. You can model, you know, a bunch of cubes and stuff, because that's kind of buildings. Pairing them to this empty here so they move by. I've been using the sprawl asset I made a lot, although I try not to rely on it because it's a little bit, it can feel a little bit homogeneous after a while, so I'm trying to model specific buildings so your eyes have something to look at. You can also just here, F3 images as planes. Alexa's currently renovating the stage in the other room, which would be cool when it's done. Gonna select one of these buildings, check emit here. Scale it up to about the right size so that a window relative to a car is maybe somewhat sensible, I think. Tab into edit mode, Control R, add some edge loops here. Maybe there, and there. And then I'm just gonna kind of fold it like a piece of paper a little bit. And if I wanted under the shader editor, here, let's create an RGB curves thing and just darken the shadows a little bit so it's just the windows lighting things up. Parent this to the empty, and we can have a few of these big buildings. Yeah, I've been doing this a lot in the car sequence, and they tend to look pretty realistic because they're just, you know, pictures of buildings. It might even make them brighter. One thing a lot of people do when they're doing night, like renders that take place at night, is they limit how bright all the lights can be. They're trying to keep everything fitting within that kind of dim space. But in real life, if you're in like a really dim, late dusk field and you turn on some headlights, those headlights are going to be by a magnitude brighter than anything else. So let them just be really bright, and that blown out bit is going to be oftentimes the thing that really gives you that realism that you want. Like in this shot I'm working on, the most realistic bit is right here, these tires, just because they're the thing that actually feel like they exist within this kind of dynamic range. These lights up here, like, why? They should be way brighter. All of this stuff over here, it's kind of like just dim and muddy. This is the bit that just looks really pretty to me. And I'm just going to keep moving ahead on this shot, but one quick note, I definitely do have this empty moving too slow, and you can tell that for two reasons. One, like, it would work, except when you look at the footage, he's like, whoa, we're going so fast, and so that feels a little bit, it's like, no, you're obviously only going like 30 miles an hour, why are you freaking out? And also the fact that I have to have all the lights going within, you know, like a meter of his window as opposed to being out actually on the street where they should be is just another implication that I should have had that empty going faster to begin with. But we're just gonna move ahead with that. Oh, and it's pretty self-evident, but I should at least talk about, you know, setting up these other lights like the blue light and all of that. The big thing, I mean, it's all really flexible, but the closer you have the light, the digital light, to matching the real light, the more it's all going to integrate, especially if they're moving around close to the light. Here, we'll put this blue light up here, and I'll just use the eyedropper to sample what color blue is actually kind of going on there with his hair. And sometimes, you know, tweak in the saturation value, but at least that gets the hue right. And on a whim on set, I set up a little red light just to get more interactive stuff, which I kind of think was a little bit much because it means I had to design this taxi here with just this big red band around it, which we're kind of implying is the glow, but it's secretly coming from this much brighter light, kind of just hidden down here in the corner. But yeah, it's movie flexibility. So we have this camera here that is taking care of the projections. I'm gonna hit Shift S, cursor to selected, and just create another camera at that exact same spot here. Go into that view, and now we can just do whatever we want, and it's nice in 4K, so we can zoom in if we want to. We can look around. I really do love that we could do like this fisheye stuff. I do wish I'd gotten more of his legs in there because I could have just rotated the camera. All would have worked. But yeah, let's change this back to perspective. Set this to something maybe a little bit more reasonable here. And at any time, we can actually, here, let's hide the footage layer here. I'm gonna shift right click to set the 3D cursor here on the back of the bench. And if I set the origin to 3D cursor and go back into that camera project view, I can still always move this camera anytime. Like in this case, I want this bag to be blocking his knees. So I'm just gonna cheat the whole thing down like this and just pretend the seat's at a slightly different angle. And there's a lot to forget. Like, this looks right. You know, this looks right. As long as you're in the right ballpark, it can be kind of forgiving. Okay, back into our other camera angle here, the one with the camera shake. I'm going to go down, add, and I'll link to all these different add-ons and things that we've made down in the description. But yeah, I'm just gonna add, let's see, out car window here. Nice. In fact, I might even speed it up and turn the scale up a little bit too, because this is going to be where most of the animation of the shot's coming from. I like mixing this with, usually I'll always put in a tiny little bit of like bike on gravel, like 0.01, just to give it like this tiny here. If we turn this one all the way down, it's just this tiny little fast grit that kind of plays interestingly with the, or sometimes like 0.2. with the motion blur, just to make it feel as if you're really going over asphalt. So yeah, again, a lot of stuff I could dial in, but this is feeling okay. The one thing that doesn't is the edge. I was so excited because we're gonna have this big bench seat here, and I'm like, oh, that'll be so good for the integration and everything. But the edges of the seat should be having these contact shadows, should be pretty dark because they're actually kind of nestled up inside of the taxi a little bit. But they're nice and bright, and it kind of makes it really obvious to see where the footage ends and the CG begins. And so that's the last thing I think I'm going to talk about today. What do we do about that? And this is another thing I'll probably at some point make just a standalone tutorial about, so it's slightly easier to find. But okay, here's our footage here. It's going into the emissive shader. This controls what it all looks like. I am going to add a mix color node in here, and I'm going to be mixing it with itself, so now nothing happens. But if I change one of these here, color, RGB curves, I'm just going to slip this into the B input here, darken that up. Now when we go back and forth, it's brighter or it's darker. I want to control this with a gradient texture, so I can decide where I want it brighter and where I want it darker. To do that, here, let's see, texture, gradient texture, going to make it a quadratic sphere. Drag that factor down into that factor, and right now I don't know where the gradient is. Here, if I control shift click on this, we can see, okay, it's down there. I want to be able to control where that is with an empty, so I'm going to create an empty here, empty sphere. Nice. I'm gonna go back into my video texture and hit Control T to bring up these mapping nodes, and for the texture coordinates I'm going to use an object, and so now I can just select this empty right here, and this empty should control the gradient. So let's see. So yeah, all right, there we go. Here we're still in the view for the gradient texture. Let's go back to our final shader here. So now you can see it's backwards. Like the empty is actually darkening the footage, and it matches how we scale it and all of that. So I'm just gonna swap these inputs here. So the empty is gonna be the bright bit. Everywhere else is just gonna fade into darkness. And we can scale it too. Like right here, I want to see more of his legs, so I'm just going to hit SZ and scale it vertically so that the sides of this get really dark, but he stays kind of in the light here. And this is a little bit of an extreme example, but here, let's, I might just kind of split the difference a little bit. But yeah, you look at this and then you compare it to the original of this, and it just feels a lot more integrated, and your attention's still where it's supposed to be. It doesn't feel overly composited. This technique saves my life all the time. In a single point in space, all that stuff where he's walking around, like his feet were always just glowing, and so I'm darkening his feet all the time. A lot of times I'll do it to tweak the colors a little bit too. Like in this case when he's talking to the phone, I wanted that blue light hitting him. I did a ton of it on this shot here where he's walking around. That's kind of what saved my butt on this one. And usually I'm doing it to hide something. Something's just a little bit too noticeable, and I'm like, let's just darken you up and kind of make you go away. But yeah, you can use it for locally fixing a white balance. A lot of times I actually use it to control the mix between like the emissive and the transparent shader, so I can control where the footage is visible and then kind of where the fade off is. It's a really easy way of doing like basic controlled 3D world masking in Blender. Like this shot here of Josh grabbing the coat. I'm fading so much stuff in and out, and you can't really tell. No, it's really handy. Oh, and I'm just looking at OBS for the first time and realizing I had my stupid head screen so big. Why was I... Oh, and I've been recording for so long. This was not an easy video to make. So yeah, along with adding camera shake and stuff, I love being able to play with depth of field here. I like to usually make the f-stop very small so I can see where it's focused, dial in the focus a little bit, and then I'll make it, I'll make it a little bit bigger. Also, let's change the perspective to panoramic. I love this fisheye lens polynomial. It took me forever to kind of figure out how it works, but the basic rule of thumb I use is K1 controls the overall zoom, and K2 controls, the amount of fisheye distortion, which is probably a horrible oversimplification of what's going on here, but that seems to work okay for me. What I really like is getting them to work together. So you have this going on, and then if we go under depth of field, we can change the ratio to be something wild. And here, if we go to a place where it's easy to see bokehs, you can see they all actually follow the curvature of the lens a little bit, which can give you a really interesting kind of organic look sometimes. 4 is ludicrous. Technically, I don't think you can ever get any more than 2 with a typical lens. And at some point, I wouldn't be surprised if like kind of fisheye lenses become one of those things that becomes overused, and so it almost feels like CG when you see it, because so many people are like, hey, look at this, all my lines are curved now. But hush, I still like it. And all right, let's finally talk about this. I've been doing a lot of my keying in Fusion and Resolve lately for the past like year, and it's working really good. Fusion is crazy powerful. I don't particularly always know what I'm doing, and it's also, I will say, one of the most confusing programs I've ever used in terms of just things you have to learn at some point. Like, why doesn't it do this? And the answer is, oh, it just can't. It just don't do that. But once you have a workflow down, it works pretty good, so I'm going to try to share mine right now. So here's this clip. It imports just regular Blackmagic, high dynamic range. And the first thing I do that is wrong is I go over here, right-click, go to LUT, Blackmagic, and I select this one because this is the linearizing LUT for my camera. We've talked about this before, there's the high dynamic range footage, but this isn't really what it looks like in real life, so you have to linearize it. And now it looks very dark. I filmed the whole thing underexposed, but because, again, it's 12-bit and the green has enough data there, it all worked out okay. But yeah, so this LUT I just applied is, it's provided by Blackmagic, and in theory it should mathematically get everything fairly linear. It doesn't do like the black level correction like Nathan Begdal's method, but it works pretty good just for here in Resolve. Unfortunately, so there's the high dynamic range. The linearizing LUT just, linearizes a bit of it and kind of discards stuff above and below a certain point, which means just already I've thrown out quite a bit of my data. Ideally, I'd want to linearize the whole thing and export it and preserve it all in an EXR through the whole workflow and just do my grade at the end. But honestly, I've tried to figure that out a few times, and I haven't, and I've never actually missed any of the data that's here. So I just work with it like this. That said, you could miss it. Like, I filmed this scene with my my Sony a7 III, and I thought that I just did a horrible job. I thought I kept everything in the dynamic range, but I was looking at this light, and just all of this data was just absolutely gone. And I was pulling my hair out. I was like, I thought I did better than this. And I'm trying to grade it and pull the data back out. Finally, after months, I realized that because I'd set the LUT at the beginning, that data was just gone from the very start of the process. And as soon as I changed that LUT to a different one that wasn't as limiting, I got all that data back. It was vastly better and easier to grade. And I also had to tweak every black level for that entire scene. You create new timeline, go. And so I'll do my edit here. Dun, dun, dun. Great. And then I will right-click, open in Fusion page. Fusion is a node-based compositor, which is really cool, and it's kind of incorporated in with Resolve now. I think all the nodes and everything I'm doing, there's a paid studio version of Resolve and Fusion, and there's also a free version. And I think all of these nodes are also, just the free version, so we should be good. Okay, so this is the media input, this is the output, this is what we'd be rendering. I don't want to be the one explaining to you what a node-based compositor is. Hopefully, you already know that. But yeah, we can add more nodes in between here, and that's the stuff, that happens. If I select this, Control Space adds a new node from this list here. But if you select a node, you can hit Control Space, and it'll pop up one. So let's do, right off the bat, let's do Delta Keyer. That's a nice, good keyer here. And I'm going to use the eyedropper and just select something kind of from behind his head. His hair is the thing I'm always kind of worried about because it's the most complex. So that's the thing I want to let the Delta Keyer mostly take care of. And under matte, I'm going to load down the threshold here just to make sure none of this is transparent. You can see there's a little bit there in the coat we're bringing back, but I don't want to do it very much. And then the same here, just to clean up all of this kind of stuff, I'm going to bring this up just a tad. Which is cool. Also, notice I make all my tracking markers out of just additional green tape, because you can always still track them great, but you also never have to rotoscope them. I've been on a few gigs where people use pink tape, and then you have to roto every single dot. Look, they're just gone. That's excellent. So now behind his head is already kind of clean, but you can see we still have it kind of fades off into other stuff. And instead of crunching this all the way up, we're actually... Because if we do that, that starts to play. You see the transparency in his hair here. Once we crunch it enough, his hair is gone, and I want to keep that. So we're going to do this with a separate kind of garbage key thing. And so here, I'm going to hit Control Space, create just a regular chroma key here. Drag this down into the input, which is this little yellow triangle. If you hover over these, you can see what the different things are. This is the input. This is the output, which is mostly what we're going to be playing with. And the other thing to mention is if you hit 1 or 2, these two windows will show whatever node you're hovering over. So right now, 2 is showing this output. And if I want, I can hover over here and hit 1, which shows me the original footage input. Or I can say, here, show me this chroma key here, which is right now doing the same thing. But with this selected, we can just kind of drag, let's clean up this area. So I'm going to drag this selection of green. And you can see, look at that, cleans up all of that. That's excellent. So how do we combine this key with this key? We're going to start doing, if you've ever used like the bool tool in Blender, like the Boolean operations, we can do the same thing, but with an alpha channel using a matte control here. So I'm going to drag that in there. For combine, we're going to be combining the alpha, and the operation is going to be minimum. So it's just going to use whatever the least amount of alpha channel is. So if we combine our two keys, it'll, get rid of as much as it can. And so this is going into the background. We're going to drag this one into the foreground. Doesn't really matter. And look at that. That suddenly gets all cleaned up. And you can stack these, which means I'm just going to do another one here. Combine alpha, minimum, do another chroma key. Chroma key down here. This time I'm going to here. 1 brings, come on, show me. Oh, there's no footage going. Plug the footage into it. 1 to show us what's going on. And let's see. And the final composite. Oh yeah, this green screen is a totally different hue. So I might try to take care of this whole thing just right here. Drag and drop if I can. Yeah, that's nice and clean. Drag that into the foreground or the background here. And this is where the confusion of fusion starts to rear its head a little bit, because you have to kind of keep track of whether all of your pixels are multiplied already by the alpha channel. If you know of like straight alpha channels or pre-multiplied or whatever, you have to know what you're doing on each node. And frankly, I don't. But the rule of thumb is if it gives you an option to post-multiply image, I uncheck it for all of them except for the very last one. So let's see. Here's one. Yes, and there's the last one. Okay, so now this looks okay. So just I don't know. That's kind of a rule of thumb right there. It looks like we've also got just this one little line here. I could probably expand one of these, but I'm just gonna add one more right here. Matte control. Try to select it right there. I'm also making sure when I do this that none of these accidentally select like a huge bunch of his hair, if his hair happens to be the same color as that bit, because then I'd lose all that good hair detail. Okay, drag this down into the foreground here, doing the exact same alpha minimum thing. Cool, that cleans it up. And actually, let's go close and take a look at his hair here. I can fix a lot of this just in the delta key here under matte. I can blur it just a little bit and erode it in here, and this would be fine and it's sharp enough. Although I hate having blurred alphas. I love when you get that nice sharp edge right there. Yeah, this actually looks pretty good. The very last thing, how do we roto? I haven't fully figured out a great way to do that yet. I mean, I know how to do it, but I haven't. In Blender and After Effects, I kind of have all the muscle memory down. In this one, I'm kind of just being like, what do I do? But let's select the delta key here. This is good for the mask. And with that tool selected, I'm going to create my mask here. Dun, dun, dun. And by default, I think it goes into the effects mask. We actually want to go into the garbage matte, which will assume that it is matting out the garbage, but instead we want to keep Tom. So I'm going to select the mask and check invert, and that keeps that. And you notice we've got this little white mark here on the timeline. That is a keyframe. I don't totally know how to work with these, but I haven't really had to, because I just go really rough here and move this around and do a quick little garbage matte. Yeah, so that's basically my keying workflow. This whole key is pretty darn good now. And this is just an introduction. Fusion can be really powerful, really complicated. You can mix and match everything. It lets you make your own tools for kind of keying and blurring the edges and fixing all of that. I'll link to a video if I can find it of kind of the edge dealing tweaking process that I've been using for most of single point in space. If you wanna follow that. But yeah, okay. How do we export this? So we get it into Blender. We're gonna go back into the timeline here. Here's our clip. We're gonna make sure we don't have any other clips above or below it. Hit I to set an in point, and O to set an out point. Go into the export panel here. Set up your file name in a folder. We're gonna change the format to EXR. This is, if you've never used EXRs before, this is the time to start. The codec. Use one of these two. The DWAA and DWAB compressions, they're slightly lossy, but not in the way you'd ever miss. They're absolutely fantastic, and without them, the file size is very big. Also, you want to use RGB half, because if you use float, the file is also very large. A slightly compressed half size EXR, or half bit depth EXR, is actually really small. A lot of times it's smaller than PNG and a lot of other formats. It plays back really fast. It holds all your time. It was designed to be a visual effects format. They are fantastic. So you do that. The rest of the settings are usually good. Sometimes I'm tempted to change the resolution, but then the alpha channel gets weird because, again, Resolve sometimes has quirks. Check export alpha, add to the render queue, and when you hit render, it's gonna save all of those EXRs, and you can just import them exactly like I was doing for the rest of the tutorial. So yeah, that's again, it's not the best technique, and you can even see right here, like the black level of his hair isn't, it's a little bit lifted, but I can usually fix that, at some point in the composite, or when I load the footage into Blender. I'll just use an RGB curve and kind of, tuck it down a little bit, and it's totally fine. So yeah, I have no idea what I'm going to title this video, but there's a lot of stuff in there. Hopefully some of it will be useful for somebody. I think I'll probably add a little intro video kind of explaining what the video is going to be about. But yeah, alright, now that I've made the video tutorial that's hard, I get to release some of the fun ones, which I'm excited about. And hopefully sleep more than 4.5 hours in a night. I don't know what's been up with that. Anyways, thank you for hanging out today. I'm really excited at all the different things coming together right now. I think episode 4 is actually going to be good. It's got a lot of moments. I don't know. I'm very excited seeing it happen. I might just go to bed right now. I'm tired. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking. Talk to you guys later. Have a good one.